Susan Birch, and welcome to another A Health Detective podcast. And today I'm talking with fellow health coach, Dr. Peter Dalonnoy. I came across one of Dr. Pete's videos, which was absolutely excellent on managing gout. And I reached out to him, and I was so thrilled that he decided to come along today and share some of his wisdom with us. Dr. Pete has got a Ph.D. in biochemistry. He's a primal health coach. He's a nutrition network advisor, and he's highly experienced in healthy weight loss, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and gout remission. And like me, he's really passionate about sharing this message with everyone. So thanks for coming so much. And would you start telling us just a little bit about yourself and your story?
Thank you so much, Susan, for the opportunity to be here. So I have a story that I think pretty much like everybody in this space, at least the people that I meet, it seems like we all have similar stories. So in 2016, I was diagnosed with gout. And then in 2019, I was diagnosed with prediabetes. And at the time, I didn't understand the strong connection between the two conditions. I didn't know that they were, being driven by a central driver. And I think, like a lot of people, I'd gotten an email at the time that I was diagnosed with prediabetes from my doctor that said that I should exercise more and eat the Mediterranean diet. And I'm not bashing the Mediterranean diet, but at the time when I got the email, I was a third-year CrossFit athlete, and I felt like I was already eating a healthy diet. That turns out not to be true, the healthy diet part of it. But I was believing and eating what I had been taught, for decades, from whatever you want to call it, the media or just the central way our culture works. And it wasn't until, and I was very frustrated because I tried to eat the Mediterranean diet for several months. And being a chemist, I went out and got a finger sticking unit. And I was even to the point of carefully measuring out black beans and things like that. And yet I could see my blood glucose just continuing to go up. My fasting glucose seemed to be all over the place and high. And I wasn't getting anywhere. To make a long story short, I found my way to the low carb lifestyle. And when I started it, which I did basically the day that I learned about it, and one of the advantages of a biochemist is that I at least knew the difference between carbs and protein and fats. And so I started eating that way right away. And I saw that my blood glucose, of course, started to stabilize really fast in the normal range in the 80s. And at the time, I didn't really understand, as I don't mean to repeat myself, but I didn't really understand the connection with the gout. And as I learned and as I read the literature, most of which was in those days was from Virta Health, I saw that they were making statements that people that our gout sufferers can do the ketogenic diet safely, yada, yada, but that they would probably have a high spike in uric acid. So in any case, at the 3-month point, when I went to the doctor and had my bloods drawn to mainly, at that time, again, I was super concerned about the diabetes thing. And I saw that my A1C was low. It went down the way it was supposed to, and my glucose had normalized. But my uric acid was through the ceiling. It was 10.8 or 10.6 mgs per deciliter. And of course, I was in the early stages of the ketogenic diet, and this is when you see that spike.
Yes.
But I was sitting there going, wow, am I going to have a flare? Am I going to have a gout flare? Why is it so high? And nobody seemed to know. And so I started going after that issue in the literature. And very quickly, I started to realize that that gout is, in fact, being driven on the simplest level by insulin resistance. I hope in our discussion we can get into the weeds on that a little, because it's
Totally.
everyone throws insulin resistance around, and this is actually unique. It comes from the fructose uric acid model of insulin resistance that has been published, numerous publications by Dr. Richard Johnson's laboratory and his collaborators over actually a number of decades now, and somewhere around 800 publications. There's a lot of literature in this area, but at the 3-month point, I did not have a gout flare. But about a month later, I had a mild one. And at that point, my uric acid was around 9 mg per deciliter.
Come down
And then I did not have another flare for almost 3 years after that. And when I finally did have another flare, it's because I had been tracking my uric acid. I do it by finger sticking, and it had normalized for me right at 8 milligrams per deciliter. So still at the very upper end of the normal range, or what the doctors are going to tell you is the normal reference range. And after 3 years of that, I just came to the end of my rope, and I started taking allopurinol. And it was in taking the allopurinol, the whole purpose of this story I'm telling you right now will make sense in a second. I took the allopurinol, and that's when I had another gout flare. And the amazing thing for me was that my uric acid was at 4.5 mg per deciliter. I mean, deep in the normal range, in the reference range. And so several months ago, this drove me finally to really ask some questions about what's going on with gout then, because actually when you get into the numbers and you look at the statistics, the argument that which the establishment makes right now, that you have high uric acid in your circulatory system, some of it's diffusing into the joint, into the synovial fluid in the joint where it crystallizes. And then, like having a sliver in your finger, there's an inflammatory response and you get the gout flare. Well, I realized when you look at the statistical data, and when I looked at my own N1, when I looked at my own experience, that this just doesn't make sense. We have 43 million people in the US walking around. There's a lot more in the worldwide, but in the US, we have 43 million people walking around that are hyperuricemic. And over half of those individuals are asymptomatic. And then on top of that, when you actually take a sample of their synovial fluid out of their joints and you look for sodium urate, or to keep things simple, uric acid crystals, you find them. So when I sat back and you take all this data together and you think about it, then you realize, all right, I agree that uric acid is required for a gout flare, but there's no way that I agree that uric acid on its own is sufficient for one. There's something more complex going on here. And I started to chase the science, and as a biochemist, I think that my training is unique in that when we try to solve a problem, we don't do it from a hallway. I sat back and I looked at everything I could find from disparate sources of science to try and understand what's going on in the joint. And when you look at it from that point of view, there's a biological cell that is in the joint, in our joints, which is called the chondrocyte, whose responsibility is to provide nutrients to our cartilage, the specialized proteins that are needed there, the specialized lipids that are needed there. I mean, they're the dudes that are supposed to be running our joints. And when I looked at Richard Johnson's work, which I believe is really tight, we're talking about more than 2 decades worth of dedication to this work. And literally, like I said earlier, hundreds of publications, plus he's got a ton of collaborators that are publishing in this area too. When I looked at his explanation for type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and then by extension, now I'm applying that to gout. The fructose uric acid model is just screaming. It's screaming out. And I'm like, it's obvious to me that this was probably happening right in the joint, and the most obvious candidate is the chondrocyte. And we have fructose metabolism going on there with the production of intracellular uric acid, which is shutting down the mitochondria, turning on de novo lipogenesis, down-regulating the nitric oxide pathway that's required for us to, for processes to push back against inflammatory events and whatnot. And the systemic cascade of cytokines and all of these things that once they start rolling, then you've got the formation of the flare. And I've pieced all of this together and put together this hypothesis for this. And yesterday, I had an interview with Richard Johnson, second time I've talked to him. And I put out the hypothesis, all the details, and he agreed that this seems to be more likely. And granted, I want to be careful here. This is a hypothesis. I don't know if any of it's true. There's going to need to be research in this area. Somebody's going to have to look for the enzymes of fructose there. And I don't have a lab. I'm just a regular person like you are. That's, I have a passion to try and help people reverse these conditions. So I can't do any of it. But one thing that we didn't tape in the discussion yesterday is that he would be excited to do this work. Now, I don't know where that's going to lead. I mean, as we've had one discussion or whatever, and I know in his laboratory he has the capabilities and the funding to do this. But anyway, without getting too far off on a tangent, I believe this model is driving a gout flare. And as soon as you think of it in those terms, then it becomes obvious what a person needs to do, because you've got to bring this to the level of the person on the street. What has to happen to avoid a gout flare on the most basic level is that you've got to eliminate the alcohol, the high fructose sugars, right? From table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, the agaves, and the processed food that have all the added sugar in it. And we need to bring the hyperglycemic events down. It's things like the potatoes and the bread. And usually when you talk to people, like on my YouTube channel now, I'm getting a lot of feedback. And granted, none of this is scientific, but in these exchanges we're having, usually in these meals that are leading to a gout flare, they've had alcohol, they've got a hyperglycemic event going on at the same time that they're having sugar. That's the one thing in common. So alcohol is a very powerful driver of this for more than one reason. I don't want to go off on that tangent yet. I mean, I want to stop in a minute so you can ask some questions and have conversation. But there are three drivers associated with alcohol alone, and they're related to this fructose cascade. Then we have the fructose coming in and driving the intracellular formation of the uric acid. And where the hyperglycemia is an issue, and this is sometimes where I get arguments from people that listen to my stuff. They go, well, I can have all the glucose I want. And I'm like, actually, you can't. If you let the situation get hyperglycemic, hyperglycemia actually activates a program in our liver, kidneys, brain, which is where we go down the Alzheimer's track. And I believe in the chondrocyte, you actually activate the polyol pathway, which can convert up to 30% of the incoming glucose into fructose. And then it just cascades in the same pathway as the fructose that's coming in from the outside. And you get this burst of uric acid. So hyperglycemia is actually a strong activator of this process. So at least so far, what I tell my followers on my YouTube channel is, before we even talk about ketogenic diets or lowering carbs, you got to stop the alcohol, the sugar, and the hyperglycemia. That's the first place to start. is to put that stuff to an end. And then there are advantages to going low carb, because when we produce the ketones, we produce beta hydroxybutyrate. And beta hydroxybutyrate, there's strong literature on this. It inhibits the main inflammasome, the main protein complex that's hitting your joint with a hammer. So the low carb lifestyle, I think, is a good way to go to put gout in remission, because you get rid of all of the main instigators out of the gate. You cut into the carbs, so we generate beta hydroxybutyrate. And so we really have a double whammy there. We pull the systemic inflammation way down low, so we're not creating that cascade of cytokines and whatnot. And then we have the beta hydroxybutyrate, which is blocking the inflammasome. Anyway, I think this is probably a good place to start. I want to stop and let you talk, or questions or anything you might be thinking.
Fantastic. So I think that was a really great big picture overview, particularly of gout. And I would say that there'll be a lot of people listening to this who would probably like us to break down some of those words and terminology a little bit. We're familiar with it, but a lot of them will be going, oh my God, what's an inflammasome? What's this? What's that? So I think you've really set a great groundwork there. And so I'd love to let's go back and kind of start at the beginning. And I want to ask you the question of what is wrong with the standard Western diet, the SAD diet, the standard American diet that you guys call it. Can you tell us what's wrong with that? Because we keep hearing that it's not a good diet, and yet it's what is advocated all the time. So would you just start, really briefly just explaining why that is leading to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, gout, dementias?
Sure. And I think this is where the two of us, our paths cross really heavily here. Yeah. Because we both coach people. And so the main thing with the standard American diet is that if you look at the food pyramid that was published, way back 77, 83, whatever it was, the process started at 77. But when you look at the food pyramid, it's sitting on top of carbohydrates. And, a lot of the naysayers about what you and I are talking about are going to say, oh, you're just saying carbohydrates are bad. And, that's not true. There's good ones and bad ones. And okay. So, but let's talk about what the reality is. And the reality is that when you look at, if we think metaphorically of a plate, and you think of the standard American meal, most of what is on that plate is carbohydrate. And of the carbohydrates, they're loaded with sugar. People, and this is one thing I've learned as a coach. Right in the beginning, I was really naive. I talked to somebody on the telephone, and we're going through an intake. And I used to tell my daughter, because we're partners, I used to tell her within the first 2 weeks, the other shoe would drop. And you would find out, and then they would find out that they were eating significantly more sugar in all kinds of different forms than they realized. So that's the first thing. I can't like.
Can we just, I know this is going to seem, really back at basics, but can you explain why you're saying carbohydrates and sugar? Because I think the point is people don't know that the bread and the fruit and the pasta and the breakfast cereal is all sugar, that it turns into sugar.
Yes, I realize we have a problem here with terminologies for sure, because, okay, if we step back from this, from the point of view of a biochemist, all carbohydrates are sugar, right? There are different forms of sugar. All right. So basically any carbohydrate that you eat is going to be broken down into, to keep things really simple here, we'll just say that they're going to be broken down into glucose and or fructose, which are two kinds of sugar. In truth, there's actually a third one too with humans, but let's not complicate things. So we have glucose and we have the fructose. Now, how that is offered to us comes in different forms. If we take sugar out of a sugar bowl and we put it into our coffee, then we're eating a substance that literally is 50% by weight glucose and 50% by weight fructose. And if we're drinking a sports drink, there's a 99% chance that what's in that sports drink is high fructose corn syrup, which is a mixture. It's not, the table sugar is actually a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose that's bonded together by a bond. So you can think of it that the chemist tied the two together with a string, and that they're going to have to be broken apart. And that's why they're 50% by weight. On the other hand, the high fructose corn syrup is actually a mixture. So the manufacturers have taken the fructose and they've taken the glucose and they've just mixed them together into water, basically. And that means that they don't have to have equal mixtures. So high fructose corn syrups are evil because there's always a higher percentage of fructose in them. And fructose is the molecule here that is doing significant dose-dependent damage when you eat it, versus the glucose, which is our bodies were designed to produce that, or excuse me, to break it down in a way that produces energy, produces it. Fructose is different because when it enters the liver, where it's dominantly going to be metabolized, it causes a decrease in energy. I don't want to get into that off that tangent.
I really would like to touch on the fructose point a little bit because, when I was studying nutrition at university, we were told to use fructose, fruits with higher fructose levels because it didn't impact on the blood glucose so much. So we didn't have this insulin response and this blood sugar response. And yet now, with, Robert Lustig's work and who were you just talking about? Johnson. Yeah. With their work, we're finding that fructose is incredibly damaging to the body. And people, just fruit. So many fruits are high in fructose and people just have no idea. So yeah, I'll just kind of throw that out there and let you expand on that a bit.
So when fructose, and this is going to be true, let's put it this way, this has been true everywhere it's been looked for. So the main three organ systems where this has really been, where the horse has been beat, maybe I shouldn't use that metaphor, where this has really been beaten to death, right? The brain, the liver, and the kidney. We know that when you eat a large dose of fructose in a short period of time, what happens when it enters into that particular organ is that basically all of that fructose is going to be converted into intracellular uric acid. And in the process of that, a few steps, and there's a few steps in there, I won't go off on the tangent with that, there is a decimation of the ATP that is present in the brain, the liver, and in the kidney. So you wipe out the concentration of ATP, you wipe out the concentration of phosphate.
So just for listeners, ATP is our energy currency. So yeah.
You can think about it like a liver having, I'm just going to make up a number, $50 worth of ATP, $50 worth of energy. And when the fructose comes in, it goes to zero. And we need the ATP in order, that organ needs the ATP in order to function. The issue with the phosphate is that when it is depleted like that, you can't make more ATP. There's nothing available to make more ATP. You're done. You've basically blocked all those pathways. And then the intracellular uric acid, which rises in an extreme way, causes the mitochondria to basically shut down, in easy language, and for the cell to shift into energy storage. So you open up de novo lipogenesis. In the liver, this means you're going to start accumulating oil droplets literally in the liver. And if this is if people are eating this way every single day chronically, you were asking originally about the standard American diet, so we'll come back to that in a second. This is how we get to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This is why our children now, why this is showing up in our children. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's the oil droplets that accumulate within the liver, and then the excess is being pushed out into the circulatory system of the oil droplets. At the same time, you have this massive rise in molecules like junk-1 and IL-1 beta. I know there's some jargon here, but basically we're activating the inflammatory cascade. So to somebody with a gout flare, that's not good news, because you basically are, I believe the chondrocytes were primed in the first place. And now you've pushed this cell into literally a program to generate the inflammatory response, which can end up as the gout flare that, is debilitating. People can't walk on it. Now, how is the standard American diet function? Why are we saying you guys need to stop eating this way? And it has to do with the fact, number one, that it's so overloaded with carbohydrates in the first place. And people are eating 5 or 6 meals a day, and there's good literature documentation of this, right? And then when you consider what they're eating, so take a standard American breakfast, right? Big bowl of oatmeal. So you're going to have hyperglycemia on an empty stomach right out of the gate. Maybe they put milk in it, which is going to have lactose in it, glucose and galactose, right? That's the one I wasn't talking about. That's going to contribute to the high glycemic meal. And then maybe they put honey, which is high in fructose, or maybe they put added sugar they put some table sugar on the oatmeal. I don't know. Maybe they put raisins in there, which are going to be high in fructose. You see where I'm going with this? And then they're going to have some kind of a
bananas or something,
Yeah, bananas or or some other hyperglycemic fruit, right? Instead of a small amount of tart ones, they're going to have, apples, right? I've actually experienced with in-laws just cutting up, and everything is like these days is bred for sweetness and size, right? It's not like what our ancestors were eating in the woods. It's not the same thing. But let me come back, because eating that way right away in the morning, all right, they've generated the hyperglycemia. There's probably fructose in the added sugar. So they already have the fructose metabolism going on in the liver. They have hyperglycemia. So you're shunting glucose into the fructose as well, the endogenous production. Then think about this. I'm retired now from teaching, but when I was working, right, everyone was in the break room at 10 a.m., an hour, maybe hour and a half after eating this meal, the type of meal I'm talking about. Or maybe they had their smoothie with all the added sugars in that, right? So an hour and a half later, what are they? They're in the break room and they're going for the bagels and the flavored creams and all of this stuff. So now we have hyperglycemia again, and possibly the added sugar, right? And this is an hour and a half before lunch. And then the lunch meal is going to be, there's going to be cookies in the box, or maybe a cupcake along with the sandwich with the high glycemic bread, sauces, I don't know, whatever's in there. So, and then there's going to be the mid-afternoon snack, right? I remember the break room with that. And that's when all the cakes and the cupcakes and all that stuff usually shows up about that time, right? And then they go home and have dinner. And if they were like me, that was 3 high carbohydrate beers while I made dinner. I'm the shopper and the cooker. And then this massive plate that was dominated by, potatoes or rice, things like that, in addition to whatever protein I had. And then after dinner promptly, I usually had my chocolate. So when you put the standard American diet in that context, and with what we know about the biochemistry here, the hyperglycemia and the fructose metabolism, I think that this is one of the main drivers of the obesity, the diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And where we get to the cardiovascular disease on this is that during the intracellular significant rise in uric acid, that hammers the nitric oxide pathway. It hammers it. And the nitric oxide dysfunction is directly linked to the impairment of the endothelial layer that is responsible for maintaining our cardiovascular system. And then there's problems with the blood pressure in regard to that too. So it has all kinds of influences here.
And we're blaming cholesterol, and really it's all that damage to that endothelial layer and all that inflammation.
Right.
That's really the starting point of the atherosclerosis and the heart disease. So
exactly. And we're not even talking right now about the role of insulin in cardiovascular disease either. I'm focused on the fructose uric acid component here, but with the hyperglycemia, you also have the over elevation of the insulin going on too, and it has its effects. I mean, yeah, and it's chronic. This is going on all day, and so this is why I tell people on my YouTube channel, and also people that I have discussions with who want to do something about their lifestyle. I'm like, well, the first thing to do is quit with the sugar. And if you're drinking alcohol every day, it has these three effects too, in complement to what's going on. That's the place to start. It's not the answer totally, right? I mean, you and I both know that, but I believe lowering the carbs, and well, you introduced the idea of Lustig, right? Lustig, and when you talk to Johnson about this, and both of them have written and talked about these things extensively. Also, Perlmutter. I haven't had an interview with him. But when you talk to these guys, they're all medical doctors. I'm not a medical doctor. They all are medical doctors. And they're like, what should people do? What should be the first thing? Well, they all say, stop eating dessert every day. And they would consider the morning meal that we just discussed, the oatmeal and so on, that is a massive dessert. All of the sugar that's in that, right? So if you start thinking about what you're eating from a different point of view, to push back on the sugar, the alcohol and whatnot, and really moderate that stuff. And I was somebody who was drinking every single day. I would have 3 beers. It didn't matter the day I had it. And I always had them while I was making dinner for my family, right? And people don't realize that just in one beer, you're talking about, some of those are going to have 23, 25 grams of glucose in them. And we're not even talking about the effect of the alcohol, which there's 3 impacts there. And then you sit down to this meal. So if people should, they really should moderate. And when those 3 guys are asked about the fruit, because I'm certain you've had this come up too, when you're talking to potential clients or maybe general discussions, people are like, but you're telling us that we can't eat, fruit that's healthy, that has the nutrients and the polyphenols and all this stuff in there. And, I'm not saying you shouldn't have fruit, right? But again, this argument gets taken out of context all the time, because rarely do these guys have a few bites of fruit, right? It's usually a bunch of it that's eaten along with, usually in context with something else that's also glycemic. So the stuff is being consumed. So let me finish and pause again here in a second. This is a very important point, because this is something that was first introduced to me by Lustig. And this is the concept of sudden excessive calories. So you have, if you think of this guy who's, let's just take it out of the context of eating this way all day long. They're about to sit down and have a meal. Their blood glucose is normal and so on. So in the standard American meal, what's going to happen is, they're going to eat this meal in a relatively short period of time. maybe it's 2 hours maximum at dinner with the alcohol. So the liver's sitting around waiting, and it looks up, and here it comes. We have a large load of glucose. We have a large load of fructose, and we have a large alcohol load all showing up at the same time. And that is going to drive the liver into the storage mode almost instantly. It's going to be Denovo lipogenesis out the gate, the inflammatory response is happening, and so on, right? Where people lose it with the fruit argument is that what those guys are saying is that if you want to have a piece of fruit, have a piece of fruit, right? But maybe think more carefully about what you're going to eat it with, like protein and fat, and choose fruits that are not going to be a sugar bomb in your gut. And you brought the issue of bananas up before, right? And they're really a good example. Certainly they have good nutrients in them, and there's a lot of potassium and so on. I'm not arguing about that. That's true. But the bananas we find in the supermarket now have been bred for sweetness and for sugar, and when you weigh those two things, it's like, I don't want anything to do with banana. I'm one of those guys that used to make this massive fruit bowl for my wife and I in the morning before I went to work, and it had low fat yogurt with a bunch of sugar in it, right? The glucose was high, and then cut up in there was the apples and bananas and all these high fructose load fruits, and then we would eat them, and I could never understand why I had significant low blood sugar an hour and a half after that, seeing stars, feeling like, oh my God, I have to eat, and why it was so confusing to me when I turned up pre-diabetic. I was just like, how does this happen? I'm eating this natural food every day, I've got my fruit bowl. How could I be causing, what is going on here? So anyway, let me pause again, and I have a tendency to go on and see what you're thinking.
That's great. You're just so full of information, and it's excellent to get it out there. So maybe just to summarize what you were talking about with all those carbohydrate foods coming in together and then the alcohol, what happens is our body has to oxidize. It has to use the alcohol first. It's so toxic to the liver. So we've got to use that, burn that for energy first. And so then our bloodstream is so full of surplus energy that it doesn't need, sends it to the liver, and in a very simplified form, it turns it into fat, and off it goes, and it gets stored around our waist, in our visceral fat stores. It contributes to fatty liver, and so starts this process. And it's this enormous load of carbohydrates which turns into sugar. Our pancreas isn't able to produce insulin quickly enough, and it has to produce this insulin over a long period of time, so we end up with very high insulin, and then our cells start to become insulin resistant, and so the process begins. Is that
a vicious cycle?
A summary of that? Yeah.
That was a good summary, I believe. And here's the thing. I believe what goes on in the brain, the liver, and also in the kidney, which Johnson's work has really shown eloquently, is going on in the chondrocyte. And there are some recent papers I found. A lot of this data I showed directly to Dr. Johnson yesterday, that show that the chondrocyte, under hyperglycemic conditions, so under the same conditions this person is eating this diet, that the chondrocyte actually goes into de novo lipogenesis. It produces oil droplets right in the chondrocyte. And when the chondrocyte gets overloaded with that, it starts producing enzymes that cause degradation right in the joint. And this is what I was getting at. You have this inflammatory event that is going on at the level of the chondrocyte, that I believe is being instigated by the simultaneous excess calories, the sudden excess calories that you've got all arriving there. And when you look at the literature, going back into the 1950s, that in the synovial fluid, the small molecules that you find there, like glucose, fructose, uric acid, all of these solutes that are normally in the circulatory system when people are eating and then afterwards even, are in comparable concentrations in the synovial fluid. So my point is that if you have a hyperglycemic event going on in the circulatory system, it's hyperglycemic in the synovial fluid where the chondrocytes are in your joint as well. And we know that under hyperglycemic events, that the glucose that's coming into that tissue can be converted into fructose directly by the polyol pathway. This is turning out to be a really important biochemical pathway in humans. And one thing that I want to say about all this, because I think a lot of people that argue with us, another argument that I hear is that, well, why are you proposing that something is happening metabolically in us that's so terrible? How did we evolve to have that process, right? And that is a really good question. And the answer is that we need to be able to program our liver and our brain and our kidneys, and I believe the chondrocytes and the other tissues where this hasn't even been looked at yet, into a storage mode. Because as hunters and gatherers, we had to move. We moved from one food source to the next, and food sources were uneven. So like, how many days did it take to get from a good fruit source, for example, to a possible animal source? And we had to go without eating during those times. So we've developed a system that allows us, when we're gorging on fruit, to convert all of our systems into producing fat and storing it.
I think
then when we move, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I think Johnson talks about that a lot, doesn't he?
Yes.
The autumn or late summer, autumn, when the fruit's ready, we eat it, we store it, and that's ready for winter when we don't have all these fruits and vegetables around. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that was excellent. Please interrupt me more. So the question is, the answer to these guys are, well, you shouldn't be activating that program constantly all day long for decades. I mean, I was 57 when I was diagnosed with the prediabetes, and which is typical age for that. And when you think about eating that way for decades, this is how we get into trouble. That's why over half of the people that are my age, over half, 52% of people 60 or more are pre-diabetic or diabetic. And, somewhere close to half of them are obese and overweight. And about half have cardiovascular disease. And then there's a significant number, I think it's 8 or 9 million of us that are also gouty. So this doesn't happen overnight. You know what I mean? We put the liver in a situation where it is fighting this battle every single day, and the pancreas and the brain and our kidneys, right? Kidney failure is pretty common in our age group too. I think it's close to 74%. Those of us that are gouty, 3/4 of us also have kidney damage. So it's like, all right, this is what happens when we eat this way for decades. And this is what I tell my daughter. The smartest thing you could do right now is to flip your pyramid, put the fats on the bottom, and put the proteins on the next level, and take your carbohydrates and put them into the small part of the peak. It doesn't mean if for someone like me, I still finger stick and I'm tracking my numbers. I've had other colleagues of mine, fellow coaches like you, ask me, do you think that you actually recover from this stuff? Is there a time when you could actually start eating the way Lustig and Johnson and Perlmutter talk about, where you can eat a diet that's more diverse. And than I currently eat, because I'm definitely 75 to 85% fat every day. My protein is can be a little bit over 20% sometimes, and my carbs are going to be between 3 and 5%. And I don't have an answer for people that are my age with the decades of damage stacked up. How do you know? I don't know when I recover. I've been experimenting. I'm not arguing to you or anyone listening to this that I have any plans to go back to drinking 3 beers a day and having these massive plates that were covered with carbs. Okay, those days are over for me for sure. But what I'm wondering is if I can I have some almond butter? What happens if I have a piece of fruit with my eggs and my bacon, right? Can I do stuff like that? And I tell people that I talk to about this, I don't know about me. I'm testing that kind of stuff right now. And I'm looking at that. I still do my bloods every 3 months with a whole rack of different things I ask for, in part because I want to be able to coach the people I work with to a better extent. And I would like to maybe try to find some answers to those kinds of questions. But what I tell my daughter is that, dude, be smart about this. Cut the sugar and the alcohol and eat in the low carb lifestyle, and listen to Lustig and Perlmutter and Johnson. Have your dessert, but do it once a week. Don't turn every single day into one long series of desserts.
A question's kind of on the same track of recovery, but slightly different. I don't know what you see with your clients, but I see a lot of people make initial gains. They'll lose weight, they certainly feel better, but the weight loss plateaus. And it's really hard to figure out how to get it to start again. Now, they see things on Facebook and everything with people who have, gone from being obese down to, and they're like, why can't I do that? And I wonder about the underlying metabolic hormonal damage and whether that is partly the reason why they're unable to keep on progressing.
Well, the number one, I'm going to just tell you, I've gotten involved. I'm not sure. I'm betting you know her, Bitten Janssen.
Oh yes, yeah, the addiction lady.
Yes, and I actually done some training with her, and
I'd love to talk to you about that afterwards. Actually,
sure.
Yeah.
No worries. And the reason why I was so interested, I was overjoyed that I got to do some stuff with her through the Nutrition Network. The reason I was so fired up about working with her, and I think some of the listeners are not going to like to hear what I'm going to say next, is that I believe that sugar addiction is the biggest blockade to being successful in the long term in this lifestyle. I learned right away with clients that I was working with that they had, in general, I know now, starting with anyone, that there's going to be problems being compliant. And this is really a big deal if you're a type 2 diabetic. You're not going to reverse the disorder if you go back to eating carbs. And usually the carbs that they want to eat are the ones that have the unrefined sugar in them. This is what I've learned.
Right.
And it's such a big deal to me. I came to the conclusion that I need to learn about addiction enough that I can actually apply, those things that I learned to helping my clients better. Being compliant in the lifestyle is not a problem with the food. I don't believe that. I'm compliant with it. The food is fabulous. It's the richest food that I've ever eaten. I think in the beginning it can feel rather sparse, and I'll get to the weight loss thing in a second, because I know you're probably getting impatient with me over that, but I want to get this out first. That I think that it's not a problem. You hear the pushback all out there. You can't sustain the low carb lifestyle because there's nothing to eat. Well, that's just not true. I think in the beginning it can feel sparse because you don't know how to cook it yet. And I've learned a lot over the last 3 years how to diversify my diet and all the things that I can cook. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a little bit of diligence. So that's part of it. I think these guys who are trying to do weight loss as part of their goals can plateau because literally the carb leakage, they're going back, right? But then there are other individuals who I think, especially postmenopausal women, who hit these plateaus and they have trouble budging there. And I think that's an issue out there. I know that when I've spoken with, if you can manage to get a interview with Tamsin Murphy, I would strongly suggest. She's I think that the top nutritionist with Nutrition Network. And I know that in those kinds of cases, like the postmenopausal women, she tends to, at the point where they plateau, with all of the things that you and I normally do, really tracking what they're eating and having a lot of conversations and whatnot. If they're compliant or whatever, then what Tamsin is doing is taking them nearly carnivore, pretty darn carnivore.
Yeah.
And raising protein seems to work. I know it's worked with some of my clients, right? Pulling the fat down a little bit and pushing the protein up. And then you usually see them break through that plateau again.
I'm really glad you raised that point because I actually do that. I push the protein up and lower the fat because I'm trying to rebalance that energy balance. But the biggest kickback we have at the moment is all this fear about protein, and particularly about animal protein. And in that group, particularly postmenopausal women, they're reading women's magazines, they're listening to, sort of vegan podcasts, and they're very, very fearful of eating in what I consider to be enough protein. They think a little bit of something once a day or a couple of times a week in the palm of their hand is sufficient.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The protein and the fat are so satiating. And you can hear this from you'll hear this from other experts too, that it's really difficult to overeat protein. And this is something that I know something about actually, because one of the issues that I've had over the last several years, it's not a weight loss thing for me. It's the fact that I work out. I'm a CrossFit trainer. I work out hard. I do high level activities, rock climbing, as an example. And I've really been unhappy with my recovery rate. Now, is this something that was happening because of the ketogenic diet? The answer is no, because I had a recovery problem before I ever went down this road. It's something that's been inherent to me. So what I decided to do, this was actually after talking to Tamsin in an unrelated conversation. We weren't talking about this, but I think it actually turned out to be when I was listening to her give a lesson on handling postmenopausal women and the weight barrier. And I thought, I should push the protein and see if if it has a positive effect on shortening my recovery time, lower than it is right now, which is, it was like around 3 days. And so I started to experiment with this, and I used Fat Secret, and I weighed my food every single day. And I was nervous about it. I'm like, oh my God, can I really eat this much protein? And I was really cranking it up, right? Well, at the end of the day, when you looked at the Fat Secret, and this was not estimations, I weighed the stuff out. And I was really consistent to weigh it after it was cooked. At the end of the day, I think the biggest protein day I had was 23%. When you calculate the average, it was 20%. Right. And why is that the case? Because I would challenge anyone out there, go ahead, try to really significant overeat protein and see where you get. Cause you can't.
Do it. No. I know you can't. I eat a lot of meat, a lot of protein, and I know you can't do it. You just get full, but you can overeat the carbs. You can push it. You can end your meal, push your plate away and go, oh, I'm so full. And they bring the dessert menu around. And all of a sudden you can like eat the dessert.
Yes, because it disrupts the satiety hunger hormones and fructose. And here's another interesting thing about Johnson's work. They've shown that fructose literally drives hunger and quantity. That when you're eating sugars that have fructose in it, it automatically drives you to eat more than you would when they put a side-by-side animal, or even they've done this with humans too. You can, the people that aren't having the fructose stop eating earlier. They're eating glucose, but no fructose with it. And they stop eating earlier. The fructose guys keep going. The interest, this is an anecdote. Yesterday, my wife and I, we went up to, my in-laws passed away recently, both of them within 6 months. But anyway, we go up to look after the house that they were in and all that kind of stuff, which is up in the mountains. And yesterday morning, we went for a big long hike, and my wife wanted to go out. And this is something that your listeners, I'm certain, can relate to, and so can you for sure. I'm sure they ask you, and you've got to like talk to them about this. But we went to this restaurant, right? Because my wife wanted to eat out afterwards to have lunch, and I'm looking at the menu, and honestly, most menus you can figure out how to eat off of. I looked at this menu yesterday and I thought, this is going to be the second time in 3 years I'm going to have a really hard time eating here. And that turned out to be the case. We had a kale salad. And as soon as I took the first bite of kale, I could taste the sugar. I mean, that's one thing that happens with us on the low carb lifestyle after you've been doing it a while, man. I think the taste of that stuff is so strong. It's like I can sense it anywhere. That's how I feel about it. And one piece of kale, and I was like, all right, they put sugar in this somehow. It's either in the dressing or it's whatever they did. And the burger that I got, obviously without a bun and all that business, but there was something sweet about that too. And I thought, all right, what are you going to do? Am I going to, I've done the best I can. Am I going to say something to my wife and say, all right, I'm push the plates away and go, I'm not going to eat. I actually didn't need to. My ketones were high and I could have fasted through the deal. But I was like, you know what? This 3 years and I'm healthy, I'm going to have it. So I just ate it. I was careful with the salad to pick the raisins and stuff like that out. I didn't eat any of that. But here's the clincher. I went from 137 pounds because I test my biomarkers every single day because I don't want to tell my clients one way of doing things and not be willing to do it myself. So I test my weight. I get up this morning, I'm used to 137 on the scale. I test my weight and I'm at 140.4 this morning.
Oh, that's something we could talk about. I want to be respectful of your time, but we could talk about the water retention with the glycogen, with the glucose, with the sugar.
Absolutely.
Because people get so upset about that. Why does the scale go up and down like that?
Well, your weight's going to fluctuate 2 to 4 pounds every day anyway. So I'm usually ranged between 134 right now and 137. That's the gap that I'm in, and it's consistent every day as long as I'm eating, well, staying low carb. The interesting thing that happened yesterday, and granted, there are confounders here because there are things that complicate this explanation, but we did hike, but that normally doesn't cause me to retain water. I mean, if I do a HIIT exercise, then I see a water effect the next day. And by the following day, it's gone. But yesterday's lunch was full on, it was sweet. And I felt like, all right, I'm protected because I'm so good about this lifestyle. And I don't I don't have a sugar addiction. I have an alcohol addiction. I'm going to be very candid with your audience and you. I have a beer thing. And so, and if you talk to Janssen about this, though, the alcohol and the sugar in the same part of the brain complement one another. And I think that that's why prior to my pre-diabetes, I think that's one of the reasons why I was hitting the chocolate so heavy every night. You know, because some people are going to say, well, chocolate's good for you. All right, you guys just stow it for a minute. It's not the cocoa that I'm talking about here. It's all of the sugar they put in that bar that came with it. That's what I'm after. That's the thing, you know. And I remember when I first started the ketogenic diet that struggling with I did struggle about the chocolate for a while. Now that craving went away, but I know that if I sit down and if I have a drink with my wife, I have a beer with my wife, you know, it brings back those cravings really, really fast. So anyway, what's my point? My point is that I'm not sure where I went.
Well, we were talking about that. We were talking about the scale weight fluctuating and having had that higher carb meal with that sugar, you know, that can help with water retention as well and cause the scale.
And that's the number one reason why I think a lot of people plateau with their weight.
Yeah.
You know, they need to be very authentic and candid about everything they put in their mouth. Like when you work with Tanzim, I've worked with her before on a personal level, giving her my bloods and everything like that. That's the first thing she says. All right, before we meet, here's what I want. I need you to spend the next 3 or 4 days, and I need to see everything you put in your mouth, including water. I want it all quantitated, every last bit of it. And I'm not saying that you're doing anything wrong, or you shouldn't hold back. You should be eating exactly the way that you've been eating. And I understand the value of that. In fact, I did it for her. You know what I'm saying? I didn't even have any qualms about it. But I think that some people with the weight loss hit a plateau because they actually are eating more carbs than they think. There's a lot of people out there, for example, that use the calorie counting programs without monitoring any biomarkers. And I don't know about you, but this is one way I found clients get into trouble, because I believe they're using the calorie counters in an incorrect way. In other words, they plan how they're going to eat food all day based on labels.
Yeah.
Or you know what I mean? And then they put it into their program and they look at the percentages and they go, okay, well, I'm still at 5% carbs. Now I'm going to eat this. But a lot of people don't realize at the end of the day, it's not about you want to be 5% carbs or less, or maybe slightly more. I don't know. It depends on what the person needs and all that kind of stuff. I don't think there's any set ketogenic way. I mean, you have to look at the individual, what are their goals, and then tweak that around till you get the right place. But what I'm saying is that the total grams that somebody's of carbs that they're eating every day is dependent on the total. It depends on what they've been doing all day long. And if you calculate out 5% of carbs at every single meal, and then you go, okay, I can eat this, and then they eat it, at the end of the day, depending on what the total number of calories were, they can easily exceed 50 grams of carbs. They can be well over that number. And if they're not testing biomarkers, they're not looking for their ketones, they just don't really know where they're at, you know. And Virta Health they were brilliant in pointing this out.
Yeah.
They were telling all of us, try to start with 50 grams of total carbs a day. How do you know you're there? Because you're going to be testing your ketones. And if you eat a meal that knocks you completely out of ketosis, then you know at the end of the day, you've exceeded the value. You're out of the 50 gram range. You know, you need to rethink the proportionality of the stuff that was on your plate.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to prefer carbs per meal anyway, just to keep more control over that insulin production. And, you know, you have that first phase insulin response, and which is triggered by whatever you ate the previous meal. And then you've got, that postprandial response. So I don't know, who was it? Can't think of it. Gabrielle Lyons, Dr. Gabrielle Lyons. She taught me about, in a healthy individual, basically 30 grams of carbs is all we can properly metabolize with our insulin response anyway. So, you know, even if you were healthy and you were doing 30 grams of carbs, 3 meals a day, that's 90 grams of carbs a day. That's way below the 200 and 300 grams that most people are eating, you know?
Yeah.
And that's in a healthy, young, active person, not in someone who's metabolically injured.
Right. Like my wife, for example, I don't think is metabolically injured. And she's probably around 100 or maybe 150 grams of carbs per day, because she eats what I cook, but she also then between these meals also takes in some other carbs. But she's lost significant weight. She looks really, really great. Her metabolic panels look excellent. I mean, so, you know, what you're pointing out there is super important, I think, to all your listeners, is that we all have our own personal carb tolerances. They exist. And when we're out there and we're getting the pushback, a lot of these people like to talk about metabolic flexibility, like everyone's got it. Well, there's a problem with that concept. Your metabolic flexible is only flexible within your carb tolerance, you know, and if you're outside that tolerance, well, then you're not flexible with what you have going on. And you don't want Richard Johnson's fat switch going on. That's what he calls this transition in the liver and the kidney and the brain from being able to actually burn energy, you know, for the mitochondria to actually be generating ATP into this program where the mitochondria is shut down and everything's being pushed into storage. You fill it, your glycogen gets full, and the Denovo lipogenesis is going crazy because you got to do something with all that substrate that's coming in.
And in the brain too, you know, you were just talking about the brain, but when our brain is insulin resistance, we might get all this glucose in there, but then we can't do anything with it. And then that drives hunger cravings and you know, the need for more sugar and hypoglycemia. And then we end up with type 3 diabetes, you know, Alzheimer's disease. And
right.
We start off with brain fog and, you know, feeling a lack of motivation and foggy in the brain, and we can't concentrate. And then it just progresses.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. Just one last, we've kind of jumped around a bit, but that's all right. I love these conversations when they go wherever they go. What about mindset? You were talking about Bitten and the addiction, and, you know, sugar is kind of a gateway drug really to other addictions, especially, you know, I think that's a really important point for parents of young children to remember that, you know, even if you're feeding them heaps and heaps of fruit, you're really stimulating those addiction pathways for later on when they become teenagers. But addiction aside, mindset, how do you deal with your clients with changing their mindset? You know, so many people are so overwhelmed by their daily lives, and they get up in the morning and they promise themselves, I'm going to have a good day today. And then, you know, by the time they get home from work, those 3 beers have come out, or the glass of wine's come out, and the chocolate.
Yeah. So I think you've hit the nail on the head. You know, the first thing I believe is that with clients, well, and with anyone who's having a discussion about, you know, I'd like to make some changes. What should I do? I think the first question is to ask them why, and to point out to them that this is actually a really important question. They should be asking not once or twice. They should be asking a lot. They need to put a lot of thought to this, because I'm not sure, I'm sure that you've had the same experience that I have. If somebody comes to me and says, I'd like to lose weight, then I'm going to ask them, why do you want to lose the weight? And usually 3 or 4 questions later, you're still asking them why. And underneath that, there's usually some really deep fundamental reasons why the weight is bothering them. And usually the weight is connected to other things anyway, on top of it. If it's a type 2 diabetic, the chances that they're significantly overweight on top of it, so that there's body issues there on top of the metabolic derangement. The question is, why do you want to do this? I think that they've got to understand that, because if they don't, then I don't think they're going to be willing to make a commitment to this. And you know what? I think making a commitment to this, the reason it's so hard is because we actually live in a world of carboholics. It's everywhere. It's not like you make a decision, okay, I'm going to go to low carb, and now you just got to worry about yourself. It's not that easy. You've got a spouse. Is the spouse going to be on board? And what kinds of work needs to be done there? I mean, potentially there's going to have to be some, right? Especially if it turns out to be a spouse that doesn't agree. And understanding your why is going to be important there, because you're going to need to be able to explain that to your spouse. This is why I want to do it. It's not just losing the weight. It's because whatever. If I focus on myself, I want to feel better. I want to have good health. I want to live my life the same way now as with the climbing and everything like that. And I realize that if I go back down the road of the beer and the hyperglycemia and the fructose, that I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm going to be sick, right? That's where things were headed, and being really crystal clear about that. And I try to also counsel my clients about the social aspects of this. All of us have a social network. And when you go out to dinner with them, or you go over to somebody's house, the fact that if you don't think creatively about that problem, that more than likely everything on the table is going to be stuff you can't eat. And so, I always suggest to them, make some stuff and take it to the gathering and put it on the table. And that way, maybe you'll be able to keep a low profile. If there isn't anything else to eat on the table, you can eat what you brought. But then there are also those social interactions that are tough. And I have a close family friend, and every time we go to dinner at her house, I know that I'm going to be under the gun. Look, I made this. Can't you just eat a little of it? And it's like, I'm really, really sorry, but no.
No, it's so challenging. I recently had lunch with some friends, and they ordered a seafood chowder, which came with like 4 absolutely humongous pieces of bread, which then they lathered with butter. So now we've got carbs and fats mixed together, and then there's the beer and the wine and the fruit juice. And, I hate to sit there feeling like the food police, but in my mind, I'm like adding up. I'm like, oh, how many teaspoons of sugar? And it's really, really challenging. And then they see me with my, small portion of meat and fat, and they think that I'm not enjoying myself and life isn't fun or something. But anyway.
Yes. And that's I've been told that, what about having fun, Pete?
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah.
I am having fun. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting. I really liked what you were saying there about, taking something along with you. I call that, if then, and I try and get my clients to really and they hate doing it. They get so annoyed with me, but I'm like, what are the challenges you're going to face? What's going to get in the way of your success? And let's plan some solutions you've got available so that they're already in your mind and in your consciousness. You don't just end up going, oh, well, there was nothing else I could do. You can go, I have some plans for this. And so I call that, if this happens, then what are you going to do, you know? And make the best choice you can. You may not be able to make a perfect choice, but make the best choice you can in that moment, you know? And if you're going to eat the bread with the chowder, well, don't have dessert, or, you know, maybe have some sparkling water and not the wine or something. I know I do sound boring, don't I? It sounds terrible.
No, I don't think it's boring, you know. Well, before I forget, because I don't want us to come to a close and forget this last thing. I know that one of the things that we really have to emphasize with our clients and other people we talk to is that this is a process, right? That's one of the things that Janssen drilled into my head. She's like, realize that if you're dealing with somebody who's actually really sugar addicted, right? And I believe that the sugar addiction thing is a continuum. On one end, I think everyone has cravings, but they can be overcome relatively easy. That's where I think I was with the chocolate. I don't think I'm at that part of the line with the beer. I think I'm somewhere else along this continuum. And then on the very other end of it, you have the people that are really seriously addicted to the substance. They can't do without it. Now, I do work with some clients that are in that boat, where if they even get around sugar, they just start eating it. So what Janssen has pointed out to me is that, especially for the ones on the upper end of that line, it can be 16 to 18 years before they can successfully just stay sober all the time. I'm using that word now generally for sugar and the alcohol, that leading up to that, they're going to relapse. And I have found the same phenomenon with people that I help with low carb. And I point out to them, look, man, this is a process. It's not perfection. And you're going to have challenges. And sometimes you're just going to give in and do what you want to do. And it doesn't matter unless you let that defeat you, right? Unless at that point you go, okay, I gave up. I'm just going to eat the way I want to eat. You know, that's where the mistake is. The thing to do is to realize, okay, well, that was today. Tomorrow's a new day. And all I'm going to do is tomorrow when I get up is go for 24 hours. I'm going to be low carb today for 24 hours. I don't care what comes up. I can do it. I'm strong enough 24 hours.
One day.
You know, and this is a process, because I think that for us coaches, we got to remember what matters most to us is what their trends are in the long run. Right? If we can get those carbs down over the long run so that they're keeping themselves low most of the time, we're going to win out.
Yeah. And I call that don't miss twice. So I have all these little things that, you know, so don't miss twice is, you know, you've gone to a birthday party, you've had a few beers, you've had some cake and dessert, thoroughly enjoyed yourself, danced on the tabletops, and next morning it's just a new day and it's another meal. And the analogy I use is missing a shower. And if you miss a shower, you don't go, oh, that's it, I'm done, I'm doomed, I can never have another shower again. You go, the first possible opportunity you get in that shower.
I like that.
Yeah, and you don't go, oh, well, I'll start having showers next Monday, or I'll start having showers on New Year's, you know. So, yeah, so don't miss twice is one of my kind of mottos that I teach my clients, yeah. Is there anything else you would like to share? We started off talking about gout. I just want to go back to that very briefly, because you have some really, really good podcasts and information about gout. So I want the listeners to know that they can go and listen to those and watch those? And some of them are short and some of them are longer, but it is such a huge problem for people. So I want to come back to that. And then, everything else that we've talked about as well. But is there anything else you'd like to share to finish up with?
Well, to summarize the gout thing, I believe that you can put gout in remission. I'm not going to use a stronger word than remission, like reversal with the diabetes. Why? Because one, the science isn't far enough along yet. And two, there hasn't been any, clinical studies to look at this. I'm hoping that's going to change in the next 5 or 10 years. Like I said, Johnson, he showed he brought it up of start the preliminary work in his lab, which I would really be excited if we do that. So to summarize, I think you can put gout in remission, but that requires giving up alcohol, sugar, and eating in a way that is not hyperglycemic. And low carb lifestyle is a really good way to go, because in addition, we produce the ketones, one of which, beta hydroxybutyrate, directly inhibits the inflammatory process. So when we eliminate the alcohol, the sugar, and the hyperglycemia, and we bring the carbs down, we put the whammy on the inflammatory cascade, right? We eliminate that. And then in addition to that, the beta hydroxybutyrate is an additional safeguard. But it requires, like all things, like if you're going to reverse type 2 diabetes, it requires a commitment to this lifestyle. If you don't, and you go back drinking alcohol, and the sugar and the hyperglycemia, with some of the people, the feedback I've gotten is they're right back into gout city almost immediately. And I think that makes perfect sense, because you're just pushing the cells that are in the cartilage over the threshold limit, and you're catalyzing the formation of the cascade, and it's a done deal. So I think you can put gout in remission if you follow this lifestyle, and I would recommend it.
So where can people find you? So Dr. Pete?
Dr. Pete's Keto Club is my YouTube channel, and I'm publishing at least one video a week. The interview that I just talked about with Rick Johnson's going to be there on Friday. And I have all kinds of different content there, down to the nuts and bolts. This is how you do the ketogenic diet for gout remission. And I have a lot of it on the science, and I push on that a lot, because what's offered to us right now is just not adequate. I mean, people are already told, well, you probably shouldn't drink alcohol since you've had a gout flare, or you shouldn't eat sugar. But my recommendations are more concise.
Most people, they get told, don't drink alcohol, don't eat meat, don't eat pork, don't eat seafood.
Exactly. And let me just say that the protein issue, I feel like, is still slightly up in the air. But the reason why I'm suggesting the ketogenic diet, and I eat upwards of 20%, I just got done telling you my story with that, 20% protein. I am careful about not like eating anchovies, not eating too much organ meat. Like, I don't think it's bad to eat chicken liver, but I'm not going to eat a whole mound of it. And you shouldn't be eating an organ meat every single day, right? So all of the protein that you just mentioned, the fish, the pork, the steak, I eat that. I have it spread over the week. And the reason why I feel like this is important to say is that I don't think I think that the protein effect is secondary to the sugar and the alcohol. The sugar and the alcohol is acute.
Yeah.
That's like throwing the hammer down. You're generating this intracellular uric acid that is not doing good things for you, and is going to instigate a gout flare if you're doing this, if you get the right magnitude of it. The protein, I believe, is secondary and can contribute to that if you're doing the protein along with all the things we just talked about that you shouldn't be doing, right? The reason why I don't think that the protein is going to turn out in the long run to be the big deal is because how do you explain our ancestry with the hunters and gatherers? I mean, we subsisted on meat and fat. It makes no sense to me that there is a problem with this. And I track my uric acid finger sticking, and I've done it for alcohol directly, and I've done it with the sugar. And I can tell you right now, when I have a protein meal, I do not see an acute rise in uric acid. If I have 1 or 2 shots of alcohol, I've done this on myself, the N1, you can see a 4-unit increase in uric acid. Like I go from 8 mg per deciliter to 12 mg per deciliter within an hour of having the drink. It's an acute rise in the circulatory system. But if I have my steak, my vegetables, in a keto style, and then a salad, does my uric acid go up? Yeah, it might go up a unit, but you're not seeing this like bang, that you see with the alcohol. It's completely different. So anyway, that's my thought about the protein. I don't agree out there where they're saying that I mean, I think there's even a movement towards a plant-based diet only. And I don't think that that's right. I think that if you want to eat plant-based, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think your concern with that is not going to be, if you've eliminated the alcohol and the sugar, it's not going to be with the protein. It's going to be getting the proportionalities right so you're not overdoing the carbs.
Yeah, and it's so hard to eat adequate calories from vegetables, so you end up bringing in all the starches and the grains and the cereals, and then we're right back to square one with the same issues and the same problems. And I think also the other thing that concerns me in general with this plant-based diet idea, well, first of all, we mostly eat a plant-based diet anyway. Most people, it's already 70% plants or more, but is that a plant-based diet just means don't eat meat. And so then we're just eating all this processed junk, thinking that that's okay because we don't have meat in our diet. And the implications that is going to have on our children's growth and mental health really worries me in the future. Parents who are already struggling to put good food on the table go, okay, great, now I don't have to provide meat for my family because meat's bad. We can have some more 2-minute noodles and some more Cheerios and,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that if someone wants to do a plant-based diet, okay, my hat's off to you. But, if you're a gout sufferer, you're going to need to look at the carbs, the hyperglycemic event, and what your carb tolerance is, right? Because I think there's 2 goals there. One is to not be having hyperglycemic events happening all day long on a chronic basis. And then the second thing is that I think there's a lot of value in having beta hydroxybutyrate circulating constantly, because it's actually, I think it's doing more than what's been shown in the literature yet. I think we're finding out more and more all the time. Yeah. And
I suspect you're probably really right about that. And then your animal foods are so nutrient dense, they provide so much of your nutrition. And so if you go plant-based, supplements are going to be an absolute must, which needs to be added into the cost of that.
Yeah. I was just talking to my wife today because I've had pushback on the plant-based thing, and what people have said to me is, well, Dr. Pete, hunters and gatherers eat carbohydrates. So how do you account for that? And I'm like, I know they ate carbohydrates, but they weren't eating off of a plate that was 55 to 65% carbohydrate, because number one, they were harder to find and the quality was different. they were not bred. Apples were not bred back then to be sweet and whatnot. And I actually did some research, a little bit of research. I looked at Native Americans, the Plains Native Americans here that were prevalent leading up to the 1800s, I guess the late 1800s, before we decimated them. And I was looking for nutrient data. I wanted to know what they ate. And they subsisted mainly on the buffalo, and they ate nose to tail. And they prioritized what they ate from the buffalo, right? They ate the fatty meats, the organ meats first, right? The lean meat was dried and mixed with fat, right? They mixed it with fat. And they did eat carbohydrates, the ones that over the short growing season. This is the northern plains of the United States, right? If you go up there right now, you could not dig in the ground with a shovel. It's frozen solid under snow and high winds, right? That's winter up there. And so during the summer seasons, they harvested tubers and things like that. They also ate berries and things that they could get. Well, I've spent a ton of time in the mountains. I grew up in the mountains, and anyone who's picked berries in the mountains in the fall when they come out, know these are little teeny berries. They aren't those Mogambo strawberries that are in the store, right? And when you read about what the Native Americans did, they mixed those berries and tuber stuff along with the leaner meat that was cut up and mashed in with the fat. And then when times were lean, like when they were moving from one camp to another, that's what they ate on. So the argument isn't that hunters and gatherers didn't eat carbohydrates. I'm not arguing that at all. But I'm saying it's not the same as the people think about their plates these days.
Exactly. They were seasonal. They were regionally available. We didn't have airplanes flying them all around the world, Hey, thank you so much for your time. It's been fabulous talking to you. I'd love to do it again sometime. And we've taken quite a lot of time. I'm sorry. I hope you've got enough.
No, you're fine.
The rest of the day. So thank you so much. And I'll make sure that I get in the show notes where people can find you. You're on LinkedIn, you're on YouTube. Do you have a Facebook page?
Yes. How about if I email you that stuff?
Yeah. And I'll make sure that's all in the show notes, and any websites and any other information that you'd like me to share with people.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah, I'll send it over in an email.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.